So this really excites me.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing. So I'm just going to ask one quick question, and then we're going to open it up because we've got a lot of folks in the audience, and I know that you're going to have questions for Sugata. And mine really isn't even a question.
Okay.
You remember the last question from last night around content? Do you want to share what you said about the importance of content?
Well, first of all, there are people who say first, if children have to learn from the internet, we've got to make content and put it up there, and then tell them where to look. But that's kind of pointless, isn't it, given the nature of the internet? Almost anything you want is up there somewhere. It's a question of if you can navigate and find it, and most children can. Particularly if they're working in groups, there's no problem at all. The second bit is, how much should the teacher know? So now you would think that, okay, if it's a physics class, then if I was there and my background is physics, I know physics, so that would be a good thing. In general, that's true. But there's another side of it, which we often forget, which is that I give you a physics question to work on, and then because I know physics, after a while I start giving you hints towards the answer. For example, I give you an altimeter, what measures pressure, and I say, how would you measure the height of this building using this altimeter? And the answer is that you'd measure the pressure at the bottom, the pressure at the top, you'd do a bit of math and find out. All that is traditional education. But there is a physicist who once said, what if the answer to the question was, I would take the altimeter up to the top of the building, I would look at my watch and I would drop it, and I would see how long it takes to fall to the ground. And then I'll calculate how tall the building was. Traditional education says that's wrong. I think it's brilliant. I think the second solution is better than the first one. So a knowledgeable teacher can also harm, if you see what I mean. But if I was teaching art, a subject about which I know nothing, then what's the relationship between you guys and me? Is that I say to you, listen guys, I've got to teach art. I have no idea what this is all about. Can we just do it together? That's the soul.
So I guess one of the things that excites me, and then we're going to get to questions, is some of the things that I hear you say make me feel uncomfortable. It makes me think back to my pedagogical training. And I was never taught the way that you're teaching, right? But that's exciting. Because as you know, a lot of America's achievement has flatlined. So it calls into question, at least in my mind, the way that I was taught to teach, is that the right way, right? And so I want to thank you for bringing that question back into my mind, and I think back into these folks' minds.
To be very honest, it feels terrible. I really wish that those kids at the hole in the wall had, sort of looked at it stupidly and finally said, we can't understand anything. Dear teacher, please help us. But they never did. So yes, it feels pretty good actually, It feels pretty good because you must understand that subjects are not in boxes, The bell rings, it's geography. The bell rings again, and it's math. I mean, what's this? Do we have little switches in our mind saying geography on, math off? Math on, geography off. We've got to combine the whole thing together. Your name's Amber, right?
Yes.
What does that mean?
It's like a stone.
It's like a stone. It has a yellowish kind of color. It comes from a very ancient word in a very ancient language called Sanskrit. The word is ambar. Ambar in Sanskrit means the dawn sky. And that's the color of the stone. Did you know your name is like that? I don't think when you say, why didn't we discover it before? We knew it before very well. We lost it. And I'll tell you why we lost it. We passed through an age called the age of empires. Not the game, but a real age of empires. Okay? So what does it take to run an empire? A huge tract of land. Let's look at the British Empire at its highest. It was an incredible achievement, all the way from Canada to New Zealand. But then, imagine running that in an age when there are no computers, no telephones. How do you transmit information on ships? How do you store information on pieces of paper? So, to run that whole empire, you need an enormous number of people. What do they need to be able to do? To write properly, and then fold up pieces of paper nicely and put them on a ship. Okay? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Why arithmetic? Because there were no machines to calculate. You had to do it in your mind. You had to have millions of people who knew just those three things and who did exactly what they were told. Because the whole world was running with a computer that didn't have electronics in it. It was a computer made up of people. People copying down things from one sheet of paper to another. People sending letters across, taking instructions, following them. In order to produce those people, you needed a system. What should that system teach? That system should teach you dress properly, sit properly, be quiet, listen carefully, read, write, do arithmetic, do as you're told. We had to have that system. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. It was brilliantly engineered. So when people say, schools are broken, schools are not broken. It's a brilliantly engineered machine that we are having difficulty getting rid of even after 300 years. It's just that it's obsolete. It's like a sci-fi movie. The school is like a machine producing these human computers for a machine outside which doesn't exist anymore. So that's what we've got to change. Thanks for asking. These films mostly focus on primary or what you call elementary school students because my work initially started with that. And that was actually almost accidental because remember the first hole-in-the-wall computer was 3 feet off the ground. So that determined the age really more than anything else. So, but it is a very receptive age, between 8 and about 13 or so. After 13, things start to change. And yes, I have worked with secondary school students. For a while, if you had asked me this question about 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said, no, it doesn't work too well with the older kids. I've changed that opinion completely. A few students of mine, PhD students, they changed my mind by doing a whole series of experiments and showing that it works just as well with secondary students. Except that the questions have to become a little more practical. It's a pity. It's a pity. I love the questions that 9-year-olds like. Why does black hair turn white? Okay, it's not an easy answer. Okay, but the older guys, they don't like that question all that much. Oh, never mind, they'll say. They need something a little more complex. Okay, to give you an example, if you take a liter of whiskey and a liter of water, after the age of 14, 15, whiskey becomes a more attractive word. So, a liter of whiskey, a liter of water, and you have a 50 milliliter cup. You take 50 milliliters of water, you put it into the whiskey. Now we've got lots of whiskey, a little bit of water in this side, and water on this side. Then you take a cup from the other side, and you pour it back into the water. Now this side's got lots of water, a little bit of whiskey. How many times do you have to do this before you have 50% whiskey and 50% water in both? Well, let me tell you, don't even try it. Right? So that's the kind of question that will engage a class. I'm in the middle of it in England, and I've had some really nice results. They worked on it with a soul. Halfway through the soul, they turned off from the computers. So I said, what's up? I said, this one can't be done with computers. They said, it needs paper. And they got down to writing equations, okay? The time passed and they couldn't do it. So I said, well, okay, it's a hard problem. But you know what they said? They said, when you come back the next time, we're going to continue with this because we are going to solve it. Okay. What the parents in India say, you know, in India, the whole system is driven by a single examination at the end of school. And how you do in that examination will determine the rest of your life. So you try anything new in school, and the parent says, will that get him more marks in that exam? Can you prove that? And if you say, I can't prove it, then they say, don't do it. Do not defocus my children from what they have to do at the end of school. So until that exam changes in India, and in England actually, I can't drive this any deeper. So coming back to your question, I can't do it at secondary because they won't let me. Okay, they'll let me do it at 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds, so I work with them and try to make as much change as I can. The youngest, the parents of the youngest children, and I've now reduced that age to 2.5, they will let you. Because they're not so scared of that exam 14 years away, you know. So I would say start with them and leave the older kids' parents, you know, let them hear what they like to hear. Don't try any experimental stuff there, you'll get chucked out of your job. Okay?
Thank you.
I hear that question often. Well, firstly, remember it's groups of 4 or 5, but several such groups. The system is that you can make your own group. I'm not going to tell you who you're grouping with. If you get bored with your group, you can change your group and join another group in the middle. You can walk around, you can talk, and you can look at what other groups are doing, and then bring that back to your own group. All that is allowed. If you do that, then the system self-corrects. And I've actually never had an instance where it's led them off into a wrong answer. Sometimes it's led them off into a different direction from what I thought it would, but never to a wrong answer. Just to give you a very quick example, but it's really funny, this example. Back in England, in a city called Children, up in the north, I was doing a solo. So I asked the teacher, what would you have done if I was not here, if I hadn't come today? So she said, I was going to do British history. So I said, okay, I'll make up a sole with British history. So the question that I made was, what was the British Raj? You know, Raj is the Indian word for the British Empire in India. So the question was, what was the British Raj? Was it good or was it bad? And this teacher said, Sugata, this is politically very incorrect. And in any case, they don't even know how to spell Raj. So what do you mean? They're only 9 years old. I said, well, let's just see what happens. So they start working. And a group of little girls in one corner, 10 minutes later, they said, Sugata, we've done it. We've got the answer. So I said, what is it? So the British Raj is an Indian takeaway restaurant in South Shields. I said to myself, my God, what an end to the empire. But then I'm thinking to myself, I am going to stand here and watch my entire method fail right in front of my eyes. But in the other corner, there's a group of little boys. And they're really noisy, and I thought their only job in life was to irritate everybody else. Okay, they were running around pushing people and things like that. One of those kids come up to the girls and says, you dummies, it's not about Indian takeaway restaurants, it's about the British Empire in India. And he goes back. The whole soul reorganizes. The noise levels reduce. And they gave a fantastic answer in the end, which I won't tell you. But anyhow, so the thing is, the answer to your question is, souls self-correct. But even more difficult, if it doesn't, you do nothing. That's really, really hard, okay? But, just to give you some support that I'm not making all this up, Jean Piaget, the famous educationist, he once asked a 9-year-old girl, what makes the wind? And the girl said, the trees. So he says, yeah, and how do the trees make the wind? So they wave their leaves and make the wind. So Piaget says she's got it exactly wrong. But it's important not to correct her because she has made a hypothesis and she will disprove it herself. Okay? So if they've gone off into the wrong direction, what I would do is I would raise another question, that's all. Not a question saying is that right or is that wrong, but a different question. If you take the average lesson plan, I wouldn't take so much the lesson plan as I would take the lesson objective. So first thing you do is step back from the lesson plan to asking yourself, why is this there? Why is this important for children to learn? So for example, if your lesson plan is, I don't know how they're phrased in this country, but suppose the lesson topic is trigonometry, the fundamentals of trigonometry, sines and cosines of angles or something like that. I will step back and say, why is it important for children to know sines and cosines of language, of angles? And the answer is, well, it helps with measurements. And it helps you to find out, how to measure things using an angle. Okay, so why is it important for children to know how to measure things? Well, one day they might get into a job where it's important to do a measurement without actually going to a certain place, and so you need an instrument, and it didn't quite excite me enough. But in Hong Kong, China, with a math teacher, I said, okay, so how do we trigger this lesson properly? And we made up a question. The question was, how does an iPad know where it is? When you say my location, it tells you where it is. How does it do that? So the kids started working on that. After a while, they said it uses GPS. So I said, well, that's just 3 letters. I mean, what does it mean, GPS? so they worked for some more time, and then they said, you need 3 satellites. So I said, yeah, why do you need 3? Why not 1? Why not 25? So they worked some more. Each time they would say, give us another 15 minutes. And they'd go back into the soul. And they came back and they said, Sugata, there's something called trigonometry. Have you heard of it? so that's what I mean by a big question. You've got to find that trigger question. Now, for those of you who are interested in teacher training, a really interesting thing to work on is how do you teach this as an ability to teachers to convert the plan into a big question? The boundaries between what you're describing as virtual and real, as we all know, it's kind of getting mixed up all the time. And what with 3D printers or something like that boundary is really getting hazy. But on a more practical note, there is a student of mine who's working on what are called FE colleges in England. FE colleges stands for further education. It's what I think in this country you would call skill-oriented education. So it's not college, it's learning a skill, like becoming a plumber or a carpenter or something like that. So she raised this question. She said, will a soul work in that environment? And she did an experiment. The experiment was on scaffolding. Okay, when you construction work, you make a scaffold. Now that's taught by an expert scaffolding guy. I mean, he teaches you because, you've got to make that scaffold and you've got to stand on it, and it can be dangerous, you can fall down. So we divided the class up into 2. Okay. To one half, we said he'll teach you. To the other half, I said, use YouTube. So they used YouTube. Okay. And she has a picture of them standing on a 2-story tall scaffold with a laptop and saying, yeah, it's pretty easy. Okay, so that to my mind is a good answer to a part of your question. That kind of merges the virtual and the real together. Could we really replace that scaffolding guy with YouTube? I don't know the answer. But I know that in that situation where that guy is not available at all, and there are many places in the world like that, YouTube's far better than nothing. Okay, so that's what you'll bridge together. And if you're working in the museum environment, which I find fascinating, that's where the 2 worlds can really, really meet. The real and the virtual coexisting side by side. Imagine a piece of pottery behind which is a projected wall, which shows the virtual world from where it came, as opposed to just having it on a stand. That's what we really should think about. Firstly, the number 4 actually is an observational number. That's the average number at the hole in the wall after that initial melee gets over, what you saw on the film. Once it settles down a bit, then you find that in the middle of the afternoon there are some 4 or 5 kids. So 4, 5. Sometimes you see 1, but I don't have enough data to support this, but that one guy isn't actually doing very much. He might be playing chess with the computer or something like that. Whereas when it's this group of 4 or 5, there's usually some kind of an animated discussion going on all the time about something or the other. Also, interestingly enough, you can't do Facebook in a group of 4. Because whose Facebook will you do? So, there are lots of things which don't get done because of that. You never look at email. Because whose email are you going to do? Anyway, I don't want my email to be seen by 3 other people. Okay? So they tend to engage with that. Sometimes they'll play games together, but that's all right. So 4 to 5. Then coming to the other part, what about 1 to 1? 1 to 1, to me, is like a book. You take a book, and yeah, sure, you can learn a lot from books by reading the book, but it's no different from that. And I can tell you this, that if I gave a hard question, like the British Raj question, to one guy with one computer, it's much more likely he'll get totally led astray somewhere by the internet. But the group of 4, it works just fine. Incidentally, just to give you a little observation about what that group of 4 consists of, most of the time, there's one guy operating the computer. There's another guy, usually his friend, next to him who's advising him. And who's saying, try that, try this, and so on. There's a third guy who occasionally takes notes, but other than that, he usually provides wrong advice to the others. in a very serious voice. And then there's a fourth character who's hovering around at the back, whose job seems to be only to disturb the other 3, by poking them and taking away the mouse and that sort of thing. All of them are very important functions in a soul. And you might say, well, what about that fourth guy? I mean, he's not learning anything. Possibly. But what is interesting is, in the next time you do a soul, he's not the joker anymore. He might be the operator now. They switch roles depending on what the soul is doing. So I think it kind of evens out. I don't have a prescriptive answer to it. I'm struggling with it, a lot of this myself at this point in time. But yes, experientially I can tell you a few things that happened. In England, it was the conversations in the staff room that really drove souls into schools. Of teachers describing what was happening in there, and then other teachers trying it, and some resisting strongly. And saying all sorts of things. One of the common things I've heard from some of the older teachers, I'm not tech savvy, you see, so I can't use this method. But you don't have to do anything. That's a good question. Yeah, that's why. So, but anyway, it's another way of saying I don't believe in this. I believe in the old method. And remember, that old method, it used to run the world for 300 years. It's difficult to get that out of our heads. That you must learn, you must be disciplined, etc., etc. You see all governments around the world every now and then slipping backwards to saying we need more discipline in the classroom. Children are not engaging. They've got to all study Latin or something like that. So, so there is a long-term solution, which I learned in the United States, by the way. I was talking about this point somewhere in Maine, and I was saying we should change the teacher training programs, because then we can impact the system in maybe 5, 6, 10 years' time. And then I was expressing my frustration when one of the young teachers raised her hand and she said, why are you getting so frustrated? We've listened to you. One day we'll be in the classroom and we'll change it. So that's my long-term answer, but at the moment, how do you do it? Because you can't leave today's kids just behind, knowing that there is a useful method. The only way I can suggest is force your way in. If you have a good principle behind you, he'll let you.
So this has been great. Let's give Dr. Mitra a big round of applause. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. And this is it for the 2013-2014 speaker series, but we're going to be back in 2014-2015. So check out the A+ Challenge website, more information, and everyone have a great day and the rest of the school year.